Alireza Firouzja and Parham Maghsoodloo both hail from the same country, Iran, and both are some of the greatest chess talents out there in the world today. Now, as you might expect, there can be a rivalry between two players who are both at the top of their game and they're living in the same chess scene. And here I'm going to show two games between these players where there was an incredible swindle. Now, the first game here shows Alireza playing white in the Iranian Championship of 2018, and here he plays the move knight takes g7, one of the finest attacking moves, honestly, I think I've ever seen, and one of the finest attacking moves that Alireza's ever played, and he's a very attacking player, reminds me a lot of Tal and Kasparov, and this move is in their mold. Now, after knight takes g7, you are not mating by force. Instead, you're just saying that after the knight checks and the queen checks and the queen goes to g7 right here, black can't move anything. This is a wonderful positional concept. We've only got two white pieces in the attack, and it's going to take time to get anything else in. But seriously, how do you move a black piece? If you move this knight right here, well, honestly, where are you going with it? But you're allowing some deadly checks and also allowing some pawns to fall. The rooks don't really have anywhere to go. And the bishop and queen both kind of want to go to d7 here. But if you go to that square, for example, trying to trade off the knight, then you're taking away the king's escape square and you just walked into a helpmate. This knight also is just kind of there. It can move, but it can't do a lot with its moves. And it also has to watch out for knight takes d6 check if it is moving. So all of this means that we basically have near Zugzwang in the middle game. This harkens back to the great immortal Zugzwang game from Aaron Nimzovich. Really, really fantastic stuff. Now, after queen to g7, of course, Maghsoodloo is going to try to create some counterplay. So he plays rook a8, and after bishop e2, he swings his other rook over so that he can get counterplay on the a file. It's kind of funny to double rooks behind a pawn on the third rank. I really do crack up a little bit there. But now Alireza is already in a position to win the game. Pawn f4 is a really strong move to open up lines of attack. This looks like a decisive attack here. Instead, he plays something slow, bishop f1. This seems to be a mistake. Maghsoodloo grabs a chance here with knight d2, and I think that what Alireza wanted was bishop h3, trying to cover the king's escape square on d7. This makes a lot of sense. But the very nice move, knight takes e4, which intends possible attempts to trade the queens here, will actually save the day for black. And if you give the check here, well, actually probably g8's a little better, but the same deal. The king is running away here. It's surprising, but there's no good knight discovery here. And because of that, the king is able to get away. Black's extra piece counts, and black should, in fact, win this chess game. So realizing that, Alireza plays bishop g2 to support e4 and to hold back. He'll go for his counterplay in a moment. And Maghsoodloo had a chance. He could have played king d7 and run for it with the king. You don't mind giving up the f7 pawn. Take the f7 pawn, but let my king be safe, please. So after king d7, the chances would have been in Maghsoodloo's court, but instead, both of these players are dynamic players. They won't counterplay, so we get a5, trying for counterplay on the queen side. But after rook a to d1, this knight here is in trouble. Of course, we're thinking about pushing pawn to f4 and opening up lines. And of course, we're still thinking about getting this bishop back to h3 without allowing e4 to fall. All of this is amounting to a winning attack. And because of that, Maghsoodloo does decide to take on b4 and give the knight on d2. But of course, in this position, after these exchanges, we get some counterplay on the queen side with the b pawn, but you have to think that Alireza is winning here. The computer certainly is liking Alireza's position. We have so many strong pieces, and we have won back the knight that we sacrificed. In any case, though, the game continues from here. Bishop h3. Now bishop e2 attacking the rook. The rook moves over, and now pawn to b2. Of course, this is a really, really critical position. You can't just take here because of rook to a1 check. The king can only go to g2, and then bishop f1 check, and taking on h3 is going to be a winning combination for black here. But we do have a win for white in this position. Alireza has conducted this attack very, very patiently, and it's time for another patient move. Now, I should point out that this is move 38 that he's going to be making, so probably both players are in time trouble right here, and they do not have time to analyze what are a lot of complications. But the patient move here was pawn to f3, saying, I'm just going to be able to move my king away. I'm not going to be caught in a mating net, and I'm immediately threatening to take on b2 and win the game easily. I'm also threatening king f2. And the big question is, what happens if you try for that counterplay with rook to a1? Well, here white wins really, really wonderfully with queen to h8 check. I need to break this all down kind of slowly. King here, knight takes d6 check. And by the way, not only does this win, this is the only way to win. If you take a misstep, then it is Maghsoodloo who is winning. So after knight takes d6 check, we're giving this check. And of course, if you take, then we just win the black queen. Very good stuff. And we're mating. Or close to mating. Here, now the king needs to move over, so it goes to this c7 square. And again, there's only one move for white. It is knight to b5 check, trying to check the king away from the queen's defense right here. Now, bishop takes b5, because when you played knight to b5, you were hanging the knight here. And pawn to d6 and check. And the king finally needs to capture here. When it captures, we win the queen on d8. If you take with the queen, we have a beautiful checkmate right here with the bishop on h3, defending the queen, and the queen that just captured on d6 standing in the king's path. So this is really, really wonderful stuff. So this is a win for Alireza, but it was a narrow path. Instead, he plays queen to h8 check, which of course looks good, but it is chasing the king away, and the king is going to survive. After the king moves over here, the best according to the engine was knight to e3 check, already thinking about defense, trading queens, stopping the b2 pawn when this could liquidate down to an endgame. But Alireza is trying to win. He pulls back here with queen to g7, but Maghsoodloo plays king c7. He's managed to walk his king away. He's going to block on d7, and he's winning the game. Queen takes check here, queen to d7, blocking. And after knight to e7, we are attacking the queen. Now, first off, you can play queen takes h3, and the discovered checks look scary, but they are not enough to checkmate. You can block them. You can go after d6, and black can just say, I'm going to survive here. A good tip is that a knight in front of a king defends incredibly well against queen checks, and it should not surprise you after processing that black is just mating in a few more moves here. However, Maghsoodloo finds another clean way here that allows him to avoid calculating all these checks and very, very dangerous mating ideas if you take on h3. Instead, he just plays rook to a1, giving up the queen right here, and probably Alireza was calculating, really intently going, what happens if you take on b1 check? My king goes to g2. If you do that, the computer is saying that there's a perpetual here. White's attack here with this crazy lineup on the 7th rank is enough. But we're not taking on b1. Instead, Maghsoodloo played a move that I would guess Alireza missed, bishop to f3. And in this position, there is nothing to do but to resign the game. Bishop f3 is a really instructive move. It's important to appreciate that when you are playing for checkmate, the hard part about checkmate is covering the escape squares. The actual checks come easily, and this is exactly the kind of illustration of that idea that you want. You just cover the escape squares, and there's no way to deal with this lineup here on the first rank. You are forcing a wonderful, wonderful checkmate. Now, I want to show you a situation in which the shoe was on the other foot. This is the Iranian Championship in 2015. Both players are obviously 3 years younger than the example I just gave, and the colors are switched. It's Maghsoodloo playing white against Firouzja, and he's obviously crushing in this position. He's up one pawn, but more importantly, his pieces are dominating, and the black king has no moves over here on the edge of the board. Unfortunately, that's actually the source of his downfall in this position. It's white to move, and a lot of moves are sensible and maintain the winning position. The most natural might be rook to c7 right here, going after the f7 pawn, and you should win the game relatively soon after this. Instead, he plays the very natural looking move rook to g3. I think the point of rook g3 is to just stick this rook on g7 and play rook to h7 checkmate. Certainly it makes sense, and it doesn't seem like there should be any way to save the game for Alireza. Now, we're picking up hints of stalemate here because the king has nowhere to go, but you've got a rook and a knight on the board, right? You can't give up both of them, can you? It turns out you can. After rook to d4 check here, the king doesn't have a lot of moves. There's actually a little symmetry here as the rook and knight coordinate to create 3 open squares for the white king. Now, the pretty obvious one that doesn't work is king here to e3, knight f1 check, and you win the rook. You actually get a trade of rooks, and this is pretty easily drawing, and the clearest draw is after the defense of the f5 pawn. You just take f5 because after takes, it's stalemate. Game is drawn right here. But what happens if the king picks one of the other 2 squares? It turns out that they both run into exactly the same idea. So I'm going to put e5 on the board. King to e5. Now in this position, we get the move knight to f3 check. That would also have been the move if the king was on g5. I'll actually show that after the king was on g5, if you do it, the king can't go to h5, because there is an option other than taking the knight if the king is on g5. It's getting checkmated in one move, which is really funny. That is worse than allowing a stalemate to draw. But with the king on e5, when the knight checks on f3, you have no choice but to take it. There's no legal alternative. And now what move does black play to save the draw, right? You don't have a stalemate by perpetual check from the rook, because if you check me, I'm just going to take you with the knight, right? And I save the game and no problems, right? Or I win the game, no problems. However, here there is the stunning move rook to f4, and this immediately draws the game. The point of rook to f4 is, of course, if you take with the king or the rook, it is stalemate here, and the game is drawn on the spot, obviously. And if you move this rook, for example, over here to try and give checkmate, then you just take on f5 with check, and when the king takes, it's a draw. And of course, if the king tries not to take, then you're going to take the knight after the king moves away. So that's also a draw, just not a good way to draw it. So in the position after rook f4 right here, the players agreed a draw. Fantastic conclusion here. I hope you enjoyed both of these swindles. I think that we have so much to look forward to from both of these players, particularly Firouzja looks to be one of the greatest talents in all of chess history. If you want to check out more of his games, then you can click right over here on top of the chessboard. I have more Firouzja games that I've really been enjoying looking at. And as always, if you like the content, you can subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of future videos.